Welcome to the show, everybody. I want to remind each of you to like and subscribe. And I've got a really exciting guest today. Everybody, this is former presidential candidate of the United States, Gloria La Riva. She received over 86,000 votes. And we're going to be talking about movies with socialist themes today. Gloria, thanks so much for joining us. Hi.
Oh, thank you, Jacques, for having me on.
You are also from New Mexico, so you're born in Albuquerque, is that right?
Yeah, born and raised in Albuquerque.
Maybe we should start with Grapes of Wrath and the New Mexico films. Grapes of Wrath had so much in it. It's John Ford, Henry Fonda plays this really great role in it. And it's got the company store, it's got this kind of faceless company and then the humans that it affects going on. And so much of that is relevant today. Can you tell us a little bit about how the themes in that movie work into your politics and the kind of, president that you would have been and the kind of ideas that you're putting forth?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I love Grapes of Wrath, and I'll tell you, I've never read the book. When I have time, I watch the movie again. But it's a very moving film. The funny thing is, Woody Guthrie made a song about Tom Joad, the hero in the movie, and the author of the book. When Steinbeck heard the song, he said, he did in a song what it took me months to write. And it is a great song, Tom Joad, Joad. People should really listen to it because it's a summation of the movie. And I think, as you said, it's very relevant because it has to do with the farm workers in California agriculture and the climate catastrophe of the Dust Bowl era, which was due to overfarming of just exploiting the land tremendously without rotation or everything that people know about agriculture. And yet that very area of Oklahoma, the whole plains and part of the Southwest is in great danger because the huge Oglala Aquifer, which is this massive lake underneath that land of probably hundreds of thousands of acres, if not millions, it's drying up. But the Mississippi River is drying up, that great, huge, enormous river with so much capacity is suffering a huge drought low in the lower reaches of the river. Of course, we're seeing more extremes of the heat, of the cold weather, of the fires, and then the massive snow. But the thing about the movie is you could play it today and people would very much relate to it. Of the poor people losing their land, their farm by the bank, having to get on this wagon and travel across to the dreamland of California and find out it's hell. But I think there's also other moments that are really beautiful, where the solidarity among the workers, among the people in that camp, that labor camp, and that the government in the time of the 30s and the WPA, the Works Project administration, where millions of people got jobs in art, culture, building roads, building highways, building bridges, building parks, everything under the Roosevelt administration, because it was the depths of the capitalist crisis. And to see that camp and the administrator and welcoming the people and the meals provided and all those things, that the government's role in helping people, which we're seeing less and less and less of. I think people would be surprised to see some of that today. So I always tell young people, watch this movie. Let's watch it together.
Yeah, and it really holds up. It's got so many kind of staples, the Pinkertons, the company store, and these people still having hope.
I just love that last scene of the mother.
Yeah. Yeah,
I've heard that's not in the book. I've heard that's not in the book. that has a different ending. But when she says, because we're the people.
Yeah, and she's a very powerful role in the movie. You know, I think Henry Fonda's character, you know, she's his mother. So you kind of see her, you know, seeing him that there's still hope possible.
And it shows in a justified light and what happened. Like you only see today, or you see in many other ways, like, oh, the police was killed, or the sheriff was killed, oh, oh, what a horrible tragedy, let's name a highway after him. And instead you see what happens to these workers who are victims of the thugs and of the role of the police. I just think it's really a truly socialist film.
How does workers coming together, like in the movie, or the idea of poor people looking out for family members and one another, that kind of social structure, when there's a company dividing land and taking farms, like
Yeah.
we're seeing again today, apparently.
Yeah, what are we seeing today is the banks get bailed out. That SVB got bailed out by how many tens of billions, hundreds of billions. And yet there was a moment in which, because that bank covers the accounts of literally thousands of wineries in California, which is what much of agriculture has turned into, is the things that aren't really food, but umpteen wineries. You get it in New York too. A lot of states are now like, oh, we'll have a winery industry too because it makes profit. But California is to the extreme. And here you had thousands of wineries where the farm workers are mostly undocumented Latino workers who very well could have not been paid. To this day, I don't even know if they've been paid or if they're last in line for this kind of bankruptcy. It's still a question that we're seeking out in the Valley, because we have young people there who've gone to different towns there where, because it's low-lying farmland, and all those farm towns are populated by undocumented workers and other Latino, maybe permanent residents or something, but they're mostly undocumented. And in this whole pandemic, they didn't get any aid except $500 for some 100,000 that Governor Newsom signed on to, the only state to do that during the pandemic, because the undocumented aren't entitled even to the Social Security that they pay into. They're not entitled to unemployment. They were not beneficiaries of any of that pandemic aid. And there's also much of the Central Valley, which is what the movie's about, is the great, great expanse of the Central Valley. There are giant areas of it, like valley, that is dried up lakeland. And because of this extra unusual, unique winter that we're getting here in California of rain, which right now we're getting rain, the flooding has destroyed thousands of farm worker homes, which are humble to begin with. And there's no plan to help them. So people are going out there trying to help in some way, mutual aid, but that doesn't provide for what people need. And so what we call for, what we do as socialists and many others too, I mean, I'm in the Party for Socialism and Liberation, is that instead of sending 113 billion to this date right now in the last year and before the war in Ukraine, that is just leading to more graveyards, is to turn that money into money that people need. The money is there and it's getting diverted from other programs that could be helping people. In May, COVID funding is going to end, so there will be no more free vaccinations, no more free testing. It's like it's all now in the private market again, or the insurance that who knows if it'll cover it. The food stamps are getting cut off in March, and there are millions of people who've been depending in the last 3 years on those food stamps. And it's going to be gone now because the government has other priorities, which is to bail out the banks and to create a whole new revived war industry. Because what they're doing is sending old weapons to Ukraine. And now they got ideas of new tanks, new nuclear missiles, new bombs, new aircraft carriers, new warships. to direct against Russia and China. I mean, you can't look at anything in the US and not see it as part of the whole global plan of the United States.
And another local film, since you were also made in New Mexico, was the 1954 film Salt of the Earth, which was the only blacklisted American film directed by Herbert J. Biberman. And I think it's got a lot of socialist themes throughout it. Of course, it's about a miners' strike, and the women take up the picket lines when the men are arrested. Uh, it, and then there's the history behind it, which I think is more what you want to talk about, which is the Hollywood 10, of course, the House Un-American Activities Committee, and more.
Well, there's a lot to say about the movie. I think it's one of the greatest movies ever made. It's, of course, part of the Library of Congress, key films that's been restored and preserved. But there was so much behind the FBI and the government trying to stop it from happening, as well as the pro-company miners and the town itself, which was attacking the Union Hall that was trying to carry out this strike. The strike lasted for months. The movie was released in 54, but it was a struggle that took place in 51, 52, part of 53. And it was the depths of the witch hunt of anyone that was accused of being a communist, from the unions to writers to, of course, Hollywood. And as you said, Biberman was one of the Hollywood 10 who went to prison. And there was the way that these filmmakers found out about this film, about this strike, was that they met Clinton Jenks, who was the leader of the whole struggle. He was a white man who was sent by the Miners and Smelters Union, Local 890, to help the workers there in that struggle. And he himself, Clinton Jenks, spent a year in prison for having refused to testify before HUAC as to whether he was a communist or not. That wasn't any of their business, he said, as well as what happened to the Hollywood 10. And so there's so much in that movie. It's a true story. And it's not only true, it's one in which the vast cast was the workers themselves, the women and the men. And there were very few Hollywood people, actual professional actors, including Will Geer, who has his own story. Will Geer, who became grandpa in The Waltons. That's like way back in the 70s. And he was very famous in that TV series. But what people don't know was that he was blacklisted also in the 50s. He was an openly gay man, which was another strike against him in those days, but he was not afraid. He was very, very courageous and openly communist. So to be in that movie was another, star in his cap of what they all intended to do, was to bring this great, great heroic struggle of the women and the men. And in particular, the women. When I talk to people about that movie, I say it is a communist film, not only made by communists, but communist themes, like where they talk about the women question, about racism, about mistreatment of the Chicanos and Mexicans, of the Chicanos and Mexicans needing to understand that it's a struggle of white and, all people, all workers together. You can't win otherwise, not to get divided, of the fight against the company, of the struggle of the women and what they had to endure, even with their men, who didn't understand why they had to have hot water in the home, because the women were always heating up the water with firewood. So it's a great film. And another thing people don't know about the film is that it was hounded by the FBI. And, even the Union Hall was burned down. But Raquel Revuelta, who is the star, along with Juan Chacon, that's his name in the film, the wife, Esperanza was her name in the movie. She was a Mexican actress, a well-known actress. And before the filming was done, she was deported. So in the last scene, when it's about to break, and all the community comes to help stop the eviction of their home, because Juan and his wife Esperanza had like a fight, because she said, "You're not gonna raise your hand to me again," and he takes off to go hunting, and then realizes the fight has to continue. He comes home and he finds out that they're being evicted. It's a company town, and so the strikers are being evicted, but the community comes together one by one. Even the kids, they start putting back the furniture in the house, which is what happened in the 30s and the 50s. And in that scene, at the last scene, where Esperanza is just proudly looking up to the sky, and Juan is talking about her and saying, "You were right, Esperanza, and together we'll win." I'm paraphrasing, but it's this really beautiful, inspiring talk he's giving about her and her role. But it's a very cloudy scene. It's almost like a filter over the picture. It was filmed in Mexico because she had been deported, and they had to finish the film by going to Mexico and finishing that scene. An amazing feat that they made the film and that it was actually debuted.
I heard that they had to smuggle the canisters back from Mexico, and that the editing of the film took place in like a secret shack. And I think they had 10 editors on the film, and like 7 of them were federal agents, if I'm remembering correctly. So yeah, there was so much of that. The crew was told to leave Silver City, New Mexico, I think, at gunpoint, and then ended up shooting in Grant County, New Mexico. And so,
Well, also
yeah,
that war, after the strike was over, the war against the workers who were involved never ended. And many of those families were blacklisted forever. Their kids, the grandkids, could never get a job in that industry in New Mexico to this day. And very sadly, the union was decertified a number of years ago. Because the war never ended. Capital, whether it's that struggle or another struggle, capitalists, no matter what industry, they never have enough. They never can make enough profit, and they're always seeking more. They're trying to, wring everything out of the workers and the community as a whole. They don't want to pay taxes. They'd rather pay zero. They want kickbacks, from the government. And so they never stop fighting to decertify that union. And with the company campaign and the hard struggle that it was to maintain the union, what ended up happening with the blacklisting of so many pro-union workers and people, it was decertified by a vote of the workers. But it's not over. I don't believe it's ever over.
yeah, and maybe before we go to a break, there's a few more things we can say about the Hollywood blacklist. There was Dalton Trumbo, and then the film Trumbo about him. We saw the New York Times run a similar piece to something I think HUAC could have done when they told you all about Bernie Sanders' sister city trip to St. Petersburg, I think it was. And so I,
And I believe that's part of what the war against Russia is about, or planned war against Russia and China for sure. But the thing about the movie is it is extremely inspiring. People who don't have any knowledge of unions, you can't help but be inspired by so many of the scenes of the resistance, of the courage of the women and the men. My parents, my mother's from Mexico, my dad from southern New Mexico. He's Mexican American too. My mother is Mexican. And so we're a Mexican family. And in the 50s, when they were a young couple, they never knew about this. They were in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And yet the people of New Mexico didn't know about it. So when I was there in 1988 doing political work in New Mexico, I used that film to draw people in and to have a nice meeting. And my parents came, and they were stunned, and they loved it, but they had never known of it. And that was them. That was my parents. That is exactly how I identify with my parents, with that couple and the people in that film. Very Mexican. And it's a shame that more people don't know it, but that's our job, right, Chuck?
One that I think is a real staple. It was nominated for 12 Academy Awards. It won 3, including Best Director for Warren Beatty, is Reds, a historical drama based around the life and career of John Reed, a North American journalist who traveled to Russia to chronicle the revolution. It's based on his firsthand observations in 10 Days That Shook the World, his 1919 classic account of the events of the revolution, which took place 2 years prior.
Yes, because we live in the country that propagates anti-communism more than anything. And the Soviet Union was always considered the enemy by the capitalist class of the US. Definitely from 47 on, with the witch hunt and the Cold War, people only saw very negative things about the Soviet Union in the mainstream media, in the movies, in the culture. So anti-communism ran deep. 1981 was very interesting. It was like, for us who saw the film at the time, it was kind of a shock. Like, we got to go see this. It had controversy because there was a lot of debate among leftists. Like, was it good? Was it worth it? Oh no, it was like a exaggeration of the struggles, or all kinds of debate. Like, was it any good for us? I think it was. First of all, because sales of 10 Days That Shook the World skyrocketed. People wanted to know, who is this John Reed, which is a great book, very important to read. And so for that alone. But in addition, there were many scenes in that movie were fantastic. The storming of the Winter Palace, the struggle of the people. And, I haven't really seen it again since then, but it is in my mind and I do remember it.
Yeah,
And
Diane Keaton,
yeah,
and there's this real fog of war or about what we're supposed to know about Russia. So I think that makes a movie like Reds as relevant as ever today. How can we look at that and the US media in those days, and maybe that could be our filter for what we're looking at today?
well, I think it has a very particular appeal. It is over 40 years old. So I don't know that, for example, young people, because what we're seeing in the last few years is that more and more young people are joining the socialist movement. Certainly our party's growing a lot because of young people. That's who's in motion. But it's not because they are inspired by what happened with the Bolshevik Revolution, or even Cuba or Venezuela or China or Vietnam. It's because they live capitalism and they're looking for a way out. I think young people today don't see much of a future with the climate change, everything that they're facing, police brutality, and the struggles they're involved in, and seeing like we keep fighting, we keep marching, nothing's happening. And so a sense of history is important. Yes, Reds is important, as well as so many other movies about socialism and about the revolution, the ones that you've been discussing. But I think that it is good to recommend it. However, it does end like a lot of these movies do. They go, nice idea, but it didn't really work. All these struggles that happened afterwards, and the decline or whatever it was, is like it's ideal. It was beautiful, the idea, but let's be real. And that was the time of Reagan. Remember, that's why it was so unusual that movie came out. 81 was this great fear that people had about what Reagan was going to do. He was practically promising war against El Salvador and Nicaragua, and was arming the Contras, the counter-revolutionaries. He was threatening the Soviet Union. This was like at the height of anti-Sovietism. So Reds was a very significant movie to come out. I thought it was really another chance for Warren Beatty to really, I don't know, show his romantic side. I thought it was a little bit much. But that's Warren Beatty.
So another one that you wanted to talk about is Elysium. It's a science fiction world where the bourgeoisie live on a space station called Elysium, and then the masses live on Earth in a kind of refugee type situation.
When I saw it, I said, this is a very socialist film. And then I saw that Variety article that you sent where they go, a lot of people are saying it's very socialist, like free healthcare and, free rights for the immigrants and screw all those borders and the rich. Jodie Foster gets her due in the movie. It was really impactful to see Matt Damon as this worker who works in that factory, this brutal, the workers are true cogs in this machinery. And that it's got these robotized police who, when he gets smart, you get punished. You can't defy in any sense the police. And then he's exposed to that radiation and he's dying. That's the lot of the worker.
Gloria, I'm having the greatest time, and I know you wanted to tell us about Norma Ray. That was another one you're excited about.
Yes, Norma Ray came out in 1979, and it still holds up today more than ever. All these movies are that you've talked about. It stars Sally Fields, and the movie is a truly heroic, true story. It's a true story of a woman, centers around her, but about her and the factory workers in a textile factory in the South, because, textiles was huge in the South, non-union. And so the centers around this Jewish man who comes into town from New York City, sent by the union. And there's part of that issue of his being Jewish and being pro-labor, and her not knowing what a Jew is or, what they're about, except a kind of a negative connotation. It's not a big part of the movie, but they become partners in this labor struggle. It's the theme of the bosses trying to divide the workers, white against black, and how they overcome that. It's about a woman's enormous courage and this super, super incredible scene, very famous scene, whereas she's trying to write down about some violations of the company in the plant. She's trying to memorize pieces of this document that's been posted on the bulletin board, goes out to tell the union guy and tries to remember some of it. And he goes, get back in there and write it down. I'll get fired. Go write it down. So she's writing on toilet paper the words, and the bosses say, stop that, Norma Ray. No, I'm not going to. So she gets up on a table and they have ordered her out of the plant. And she's just so emotional. She gets up on the table, has written down on a cardboard, union. And so she shows it all around. And over a few minutes, the workers start to turn off the machinery. And so they just shut down the place. They drag her out and throw her in a cop car. And she just starts screaming like she can't believe she's going to jail. The whole movie is so fantastic. And it was true. And it's a struggle about the Southern workers, which is still a big battle. The auto plants have been set up there. Other industries have gone down there because they feel like, yeah, we can avoid the union. Amazon's down there.
And Sally Field went on to win the Oscar for Best Actress for her performance in Norma Ray. And
Yeah.
it was also a meaningful movie for you when you were organizing at the time.
Yeah, I was 24 years old and I had just walked into a job the year before of a small shopping newspaper in Fairport, New York, right next to Rochester. I just started talking to the women. I just become a communist and I was all, to work with the workers. And I asked them, I said, what do you all make? And they go, that's none of your business. I said, oh, because I make $5 an hour. $5? We make $3.25 an hour. And I said, well, you should make as much or more than me because I just got here. And they didn't get mad at me. They thought like, wow, you think we should make as much as you? That was like a light in their head. It was also proof to me, don't hide what you get paid to your workers.
Explain that, please, the importance of telling other workers in the company what you're making.
In our society, under capitalism, it's considered rude to ask, what do you pay for your rent? What do you get paid? It's like, oh, that's my business. Even in the workplace, invariably without a union and a contract, everyone's kept in the dark about each other. The boss always goes, you're better than the other. I'm going to give you something, but don't tell the others. So after a couple months, I went to the boss. His name was Stan. I said, Stan, I have to leave. I need a higher pay. I'm going to look for another job. He goes, I can't afford you to raise your pay. I go, okay, I'm leaving. He goes, I'll give you 50 cents an hour, but don't tell anybody else. I mean, he literally told me that. So I walked down and I told the women, I just got 50 cents. They were livid. They said, he denied us a raise. He's not giving us a raise. So they said, come on, Gloria, you're going with us. I walked in with him and he was pretty upset. He goes, I don't appreciate you championing a cause inside my workplace. Outside, fine, not in my place. But he gave them a 25-cent an hour raise. And that began the road to unionization. He mistreated us so much. One day the women said, Gloria, call the union. And we had 5 months of struggle. And that's when Norma Ray was coming out. And when I went to the movie theater with my boyfriend at the time, it brought me to tears because I felt her pain, which was mine. And we won the union drive, I'll tell you. And I had told the women when I started, I said, I'm a communist. This was 79. And we would have these debates at work, debates. Before the union drive, it was more hostile. After the union drive, we were very close friends. We were all women and we were fighting together. And so they had more of an open mind. And right before the union vote, the boss was pulling out all the stops. He ordered me to shut up. He took them out to a banquet, finally, he cried to them and he said, I'm sorry, I neglected you. If you vote no to the union, I promise I'll make it all up to you afterwards. And he said, and by the way, Gloria is a communist and she belongs to a revolutionary party that wants revolution in the United States. Well, when they came back, they didn't invite me. He didn't invite me. And I was all alone. I'm like, what's he going to do with them? They came back and I said, well, what happened? And Dorothy goes, well, he told us that you belong to a revolutionary party and that you're a communist. And I said, well, what did you say? We said, we all know that already. So they were already inoculated. That didn't faze them at all. It was like, we won a union. And we won the election the next day. And we got fired.
Well, God, it sounds like that was catalyst type moments for you to.
Oh, yeah. It made me understand the war of the bosses against the workers when you want to have your rights, when you want to be together and demand equality and dignity in the workplace. I will say, though, I did get my union card of the International Typographical Union, and it gave me a lifetime job till my recent retirement because of a union. And now with this obscene wealth accumulation of the capitalists, they're getting richer and richer. The Zuckerberg, Bezos, all the others with, there's a million of them. And the poor and the working class and the middle class just being driven downward. People are becoming much more conscious. It's not just that they're poor or insecure, it's that they see that their labor is making others rich. And that's why there's these drives with the alphabet workers, with the Amazon victory that there was with the Starbucks workers. Just people are starting to think about union. The
Yeah,
40,000 LA
can
school
you
teachers and
explain to me the concept of workers owning their labor and what that labor's worth, or uh, capital being dead labor? Is I think
well, it's a lot. It's a lot to talk about, but here's
yeah,
the thing.
that's true.
The only thing that the people have, if you don't own a company or you're not one of their little sergeants doing their bidding, you're a worker. Even if you're unemployed, and the only thing we have for our survival essentially is that part of the labor that we are paid for to sustain us for life and continue living, while the boss gets all the rest of it to pay for, let's say, the operation of the plant and the things that make the place run, the resources to build the production, and the rest is profit. And so over time, because the wealth that we create, the full value of we create, we are not compensated for it. We're only compensated for a small part of it, and the rest being profit. Over time, with the competition of the capitalists, whether it's one car company against another, producing, overproducing so that they can outsell the other with an invisible market. They don't have a guaranteed market. They just want to push you to buy so they can have that profit. But over time, it's overproduction. Too many cars, too many houses. And it's not too many houses for a profit. That's what happened in 2008. That's why the housing system collapsed. They gave out too many loans. They built too many houses. So now you have, it's estimated 17 million empty homes, most of them new, and a maximum of, let's say, 3 million people homeless, because there's a large number of people who are underhoused, joining up with other families because they can't afford it. But in other words, there's so many homes that could provide a home to every individual, but you can't pay for it because we're not paid enough, because we're exploited is the word. And so I always tell people when myself and our other members of my party and other ways that we explain to people the absurdity, the crime of capitalism, the crime that is like they break down the walls of other countries to make those countries buy the products that the US has too much of. They've grown too much soy, wheat, and corn in the United States. The farmers have overproduction of all these farm products. So in the 1990s, they had to force other countries to accept those goods. And what did they do? Clinton forced basically Mexico to sign NAFTA, North American Free Trade Act, which meant that Mexico, which was famous for producing its own corn, all the little farmers, they fed themselves with their corn. They fed the population with corn and their beans and other products. Now Mexico doesn't grow its own corn because US product has invaded their country in order to solve the pending economic crisis of the capitalists. That's what happened in 1929. That's what happened in 2008. But who paid for that housing crisis, banking crisis in 2008? Us. We paid for that $1 trillion bailout of the banks. And that's what just happened with the SVB bank. They got bailed out and the workers get screwed.
Is there anything you want to say about Dr. Strangelove before we go?
That's another very relevant movie now. It's a satire, but at the time that it was made in the 60s, it was a serious social commentary, even with the humor in it. It was a serious social commentary of the nuclear weapons race of the United States. It was also portrayed as a competition with the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union was trying to produce its weapons as a defense as a deterrent from the US having exploded the only nuclear bombs to date in Japan. And the movie is a classic. It's Peter Sellers, the comic actor, playing 3 roles. A Nazi-like character, like a Werner von Braun, that Nazi who was brought in to help produce US weapons after the war, after World War II. He plays a British officer, military officer, and he plays the president of the United States. So he's brilliant in it, but it really is the madness of the US Pentagon, which at that time had calculated they could win a nuclear war. They calculated how many millions of people would die in such a war, but that enough people would survive. Of course, I don't know if you know, but the National Security Council of those days, and even I'm sure today, have plans that if there were ever a nuclear crisis or a crisis of serious war, all the top officials, politicians would get put down into deep bunkers. In fact, that's something that Ramsey Clark, who was Attorney General at the time under Johnson, he was Assistant Attorney General under Kennedy when the Cuban Missile Crisis took place. He was instructed by the president, go take the Supreme Court justices down into bunkers because they thought there would be a nuclear war. But anyway, Dr. Strangelove has to be seen today. And we have to fight against this US war drive that is endangering all the world. And if people are interested in knowing more, they can check into the liberationnews.org, liberation and then news.org, which has a lot of articles about the anti-war movement, about an analysis of what's really taken place with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We, in our country of the United States, we have a big fight before us, the fight for the people here in the US, the right to housing, healthcare, food, education, the right to be living in a world where the whole world isn't declared our enemy. The world is not our enemy. The enemy is the Pentagon and the capitalist class, which would do to us what they've done to other countries if they had the chance, if they had to fight us, if we were to rise up. But ultimately, I think we're going to win. We just got to get active. We just got to stay active.
Gloria, thanks so much again. Everybody, this was Gloria La Riva from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and we'll see you all next week.
Jacques, thank you so much. I really enjoyed chatting with you about stuff, and I appreciate the invitation.